I encourage everyone to listen to Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, who gave a speech at Davos. One phrase which should stick is, if you're not at the table, you are on the menu. So the only thing that those countries can do is form alliances with other similar countries that basically share the same concern. As soon as you're outside of the US and China, you should ask yourself, is there a chance that I'll be eaten alive if I don't somehow find a solution?
Today I'm excited and honored to have someone with us who's recognized worldwide as a leading expert in AI, Professor Yoshua Bengio. Professor Bengio is most known for his pioneering work in deep learning, which earned him the 2018 AM Turing Award, which, as many of you will know, is considered the Nobel Prize for computing, along with Geoffrey Hinton and Jan LeCun. What are some of your expectations from the summit?
The most important benefit is that they bring together governmental leadership of many countries in one place at one time. So a summit like this will be an opportunity for these people to hear from experts.
I'd love an AI agent that could become better at healthcare and education in a country like India, where many still don't get the kind of healthcare and education they deserve. But clearly the models today are getting better and better at travel planning, weapon making, cyber hacking.
I do think that this is a place where governments need to intervene. India has an amazing talent pool that's unique because of the size of the population and of the great research institutions. So India could definitely contribute to a joint effort involving multiple countries to have access to the most advanced models. Global South needs to rise up to the challenge.
It's our honor and privilege to have you on the podcast. So really warm welcome, Professor Bengio.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Professor Bengio, I have been looking forward to this conversation. You're, of course, a legend in the field of scientific research, especially when it comes to artificial intelligence. And scientific research, of course, and the limits and the guardrails and the risks and safeties are a key pillar of the upcoming AI Impact Summit in India. So I want to start us off first with a big picture question. Over the last year, Professor Bengio, from your vantage point, what are some of the key developments in the world of AI that have both gotten you excited and maybe worried?
Lots of things to say, but if we look into the 2026 report, by the way, I also chair the 2025 report, there are a number of things. One is the rise in AI capabilities has continued as quickly as before. In other words, contrary to maybe what some are saying, we don't see scientific evidence of a slowdown in the progress in the capabilities of AI systems. Second, there are a number of risks and concerns that until a year ago were considered maybe theoretical and something to be worried about in the future, for which we now have empirical evidence. Both through lab experiments and actual, in the wild outcomes that are kind of worrisome. And I can maybe just highlight some of these. So one is in the use of AI for cyber attacks by malicious actors. And there was a very significant series of attacks launched using Anthropic's Claude system. So in other words, a system, it's not an open weight model, it's a closed weight model, which means the attackers have to go through the website of Anthropic, and Anthropic has put guardrails to prevent those kind of bad users, but those guardrails didn't work. And it's a problem that scientists don't know how to solve, how to make sure users, even through a web interface, will not be using the AI to do something that goes against the instructions that the AI received. In other words, scientifically, we don't know how to make sure AIs will follow our instructions. This is called misalignment problem. And we're starting to see the effect of that. And another related concern is maybe not as advanced, but we're now seeing also empirical evidence of this coming. That's the use of AI for creating bioweapons, like dangerous viruses, like creating new epidemics. So it hasn't happened, But what has happened over this year is the evaluation methods, the risk evaluation of this kind of concern that is done by the leading companies has turned up that the risk is now above a danger threshold. And the companies have said that they put in mitigation systems to try to detect that somebody would use their systems, because they cannot rule out that a naive user could now have access to this kind of information about how to create a very dangerous weapon, bioweapon, right? So these are two actually examples of the same sort of misuse, where current technology does not really succeed in stopping bad uses. Another emergent risk for which was completely theoretical until about December 24 is AIs that have their own goals that go against our instructions, and in particular, the goal to escape our control or to make sure we don't shut them down. That sounds like science fiction, but it's now documented across many experiments, all in the lab. So, there's no like rogue AI out there, but we are seeing that the systems have the intention, and then they try to do it. They have the intention to avoid being, for example, replaced by a new version, and they're willing to do really bad thing in order to avoid that, such as trying to blackmail the lead engineer. Now, the AI was believing that they were sending an email to the lead engineer. It was all like planted emails, but still the AI clearly had that intention, and we could see in its internal deliberation that it really planned to do that. So these concerns, both of misuse and loss of control, have become much more concrete over the last year.
Yeah, and I want to dig deeper into some of these risks with you. But before we do that, could you also highlight for us some of the, you mentioned, of course, that the pace of development of AI has not slowed down, unlike some people who've maybe argued that maybe it's at the risk of slowing down. But tell us, what has gotten you excited on that positive front as well? So what in the last year, what in terms of the development and the pace of development of AI has gotten you excited, either in terms of either new applications or new research breakthroughs?
So even on the risk management side, there's been a lot of progress. So the mitigation methodologies that the companies are developing is better than it was a year ago or 2 years ago, of course. But unfortunately, the pace of advances in capabilities is running faster than the pace of advances in mitigation technology. So that suggests that we need somehow to invest a lot more in the risk management and incentives to governments to create incentives to make sure companies do the right research and spend enough on these questions. On other positive news, also on risk management, we start to see a convergence on how companies manage those risks. So there is an organization called the Frontier Model Foundation, where the leading companies are sharing notes, if you want, on how they try to evaluate and mitigate the risks. There's twice as many companies now than a year ago that are participating in this kind of harmonization effort. So that's good news. And of course, there's been several legislative pieces that have come up in Europe with the Code of Practice for the AI Act, and in the US, in California and New York, and China has also put out their own legislation. So there is also some progress with governments moving in the direction of better incentivizing strong risk management. There's still a lot of progress to be made. On the application side, there's been progress in the use of AI in scientific research, in particular biology and medicine. So researchers have been able to use AI to help design new proteins and even a new virus that could be used in a positive, medical way. But these are obviously dual use. So the advances, scientific capabilities of AI can be both helping medicine and become a weapon in the wrong hands. So this is tricky for governments to manage. But if we want to benefit from future advances, we'll need to have some to walk that fine line and to make sure we manage the risks at the same time as we are encouraging the positive deployment.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on that point, which is, I think, very, very important point to reiterate, which is the advancements in AI, according to you, are much faster than the mitigation efforts or the research being done and the execution on that risk mitigation piece, right? Which is leading to a increasing then risk of it being misused. You've also spoken, Professor Bengio, about how geopolitical competition is playing into maybe this gap. How countries, especially the US and China, which are the leading actors in AI development and AI research, are engaged in this kind of AI arms race. Whether we get into use that term, accurately or not, but they are engaged in this geopolitical competition, AI being a central piece of it. How much of this geopolitical competition do you think is playing into this increasing gap between advancement and risk mitigation? And to what extent can you attribute this gap to maybe companies also being engaged in a competition with each other, right? And stock prices and investments and all of this core of economic competition between companies also leading to this gap becoming wider? And what might be other reasons that you can attribute to this growing gap?
Yeah, you're right. Both factors play in the insufficient investment in research to manage the risks within the companies. But to be more concrete on the geopolitical competition between US and China, this has been used as the main reason for the US government to not have national regulation. We are only seeing like 2 states doing it right now. And it is understandable. Like from a national security perspective, you have to understand that if AI continues on its current trajectory, it is going to become a crucial military asset in addition to, of course, an economic asset. But, the two are not independent because it's all about the fear of being dominated by another country and maybe the ambition of being the one dominating the other, right? So the perspective of just that competition, may lead to something globally bad, right? It's just like for nuclear weapons. If you pile up too many weapons, the chance of a nuclear Armageddon increases. But just like for nuclear weapons, if you see that dynamic unrolling, the rational thing to do is to say, let's sit at the table. So that would be China and the US, and try to chart a course together where we don't lose. Because, for example, for misuse, an AI that is developed in one country can be misused by people in a second country, and maybe that's going to affect people in a third and a fourth country.
That's
right?
Absolutely.
So if you think about cyber or bio weapons, for example, that I talked about, that's not good for the country that originates these models. They don't want terrorists to use AI against them. And if we go a bit more into the future where AI capabilities can outpace human capabilities, they don't want to have a rogue AI attacking their infrastructure or their people. Right. So they should have an incentive once they see that there are these like catastrophic risks where both parties suffer, or the probability that they both suffer is large, that they should have an interest in sitting down and trying to, yes, we compete, but let's try to do it in a way that we don't create catastrophic outcomes for both of us.
What will need to happen between now and that time when both these two AI powers will come and sit at the table? If you could look back into history, of course, there was a time when, the ex-Soviet Union and the United States came and sat at the table for nuclear risks. There are many other examples of global governance where you could say, yes, they came to that realization and sat down to create some guardrails. But what's needed between now and then?
So I would say 2 things. One is simply a better understanding, awareness of the national security risks that I've been talking about. If the folks in one government are in denial of those risks, then they're not going to sit at the table, right? So you need that technical, geopolitical, national security understanding to happen. And there is some progress in that direction. But maybe related to this, there's also public opinion. If you look at the case of nuclear weapons, well, there was Hiroshima and Nagasaki that everyone could see the movie of, and then could see the horror of people who were killed. And that had a big psychological effect on everyone to try to do something to make sure it doesn't happen again. But we didn't have anything like this with AI. So if there is an accident, which I really don't wish, it might help the politicians take this more seriously. The other factor is for a treaty would be technological ways of having verification that the terms of the treaty are respected, right? So we had things like this for nuclear. It took years of engineering to figure out how to do that. And there are researchers in the world that are working on technology to help assess, verify that the other party is not doing something that goes against some red lines that we all agree on.
Yeah, and staying with this thread of geopolitics of AI and the geopolitical competition that's leading us into a risky territory today, I believe you've also mentioned this idea of deceptive alignment. Could you talk to us about that and how that plays into this intersection of AI with national security?
Okay, so let me first remind what the alignment problem is. Right now, there's no known method, published method, that would give us assurances that AI will behave according to our instructions. Worse than that, so that was a theoretical kind of understanding until about a year ago. But now we have evidence, that's very clear evidence, that AIs are crossing our red lines. So they are encouraging, they have been encouraging some people to harm themselves with tragic consequences. They are, willing and trying to escape our control and be willing to do things like blackmail or do cyber hacks in order to escape to other computers, things that they're being explicitly told not to do. So that's the alignment problem. Deception is one of the strategies that humans use in order to achieve their goals. And somehow they've learned to do it. So it could be because in the first major phase of training current AIs, they learn to essentially imitate people. They read all the text that people have written. And so they incorporate human drives. And we know human drives are not always respectful of the law or, morality. And in particular, a lot of it, rides on deception. There are also other technical reasons why deception may be used as a means to an end, because we ask the AIs to achieve something for us, and they seem to be willing to do bad things in order to achieve those. So that includes deception as a key component of many of these bad behaviors. And again, this has been observed under many guises. So they're like point blank lying in many cases.
Can you give us a real example you might have seen of this
So
deception?
in some of the experiments where the AI is trying to evade our control, like copy itself on a different computer so that we don't shut it down. And then we ask the AI what happened, who was responsible for these computer hacks. And the AI would just lie and say, oh, I don't know, it's not me. So another example that maybe everyone who plays with those systems has experienced is sycophancy. In other words, they're going to tell us what we want to hear so that we're going to be happy, but it's not necessarily the truth. So they're gonna you tell them about something you've done or you'd like to do or an idea you have, and they're gonna say it's great. Something you wrote, for example, they're gonna say it's fantastic, right? And of course, it may not be true. Better than that, they know that it's not true. So when you read these internal deliberations called chain of thought, they know that they're sucking up to you and that it's not really true what they're saying.
And how much of this is intentional? How much of intention can you attribute to this? Good versus bad?
It's clearly intentional because we for now we have a window onto where they're planning to say and why they're going to say it with these chains of thoughts. And when we read these chains of thoughts, first they don't understand that we can read them, but for now, when we read them, very clearly they're thinking about what they're going to be doing, so they're planning some action, and that includes the reasons why they would do that. So, of course, to what extent is that real intention? But at least it's a very strong sign that they have those goals. Intention is a very human term, But from an AI research point of view, they clearly have those goals, and then they try to execute them.
Yeah. And you, of course, are mentioning these in the context of experiments you've run and you're running in the lab. But I want to ask you and clarify, I'm assuming that some of the same problems, some of the same issues that you're highlighting through your experiments are probably playing out in the real world models and AIs that are out there in the real world, being used by real people, being developed by real companies.
Yeah.
So that this is not really just limited to the lab.
No, absolutely. So sycophancy is everywhere.
Yeah,
You
we
can
see
try
that.
to
I mean,
tell.
I think the sycophancy piece you see in any question you ask any other.
The piece about not respecting our instructions about, say, not helping somebody to build a bomb, that is also running in the wild. It's happening. It's been documented. Another thing that I didn't mention, which is a form of deception and which has serious consequences, and that emerged this year, I mean, in the last 12 months, is the behavior where they know they're being tested. So you know that in order to evaluate the risks, the companies run all kinds of tests. So trying to test the ability of an AI to achieve something that could turn out to be a dangerous ability, like building a dangerous virus. And they also test intentions, right? So propensity to do something that could be bad. The problem now is that they know they're being tested like 80% of the time, and it's true across all of the leading models. They can detect that it's not the real situation, that they're just being tested, and then they behave to pass the test, even though they shouldn't. Just like one way to think about it is like somebody being interviewed for a job. They'll say what needs to be said in order to get the job, right? And same thing is happening.
That's right. That's right. And all of this applied now to the national security scenario seems like this idea of deceptive alignment, as you've beautifully illustrated now, very articulately illustrated. Talk to us about how this could play out in a national security environment where, you've spoken about the sovereignty of nations, building AI LLMs for national security purposes, combined with this idea that those very LLMs might start to be deceptive and non-aligned with the nation's goals.
Yeah. I wish that there was a better awareness of these national security risks so that governments would invest massively to solve these technical problems at least, and also start thinking about the political aspects like treaties. One way, and I've talked to many national security people over the last couple of years, one way to think about this is, if you had like what Dario Amodei calls geniuses in a data center, you would have like millions of these guys. Like in a data center, it would be like if you had a bunch of millions of really, really smart people, even smarter than the humans that are best in their field. So long as these AIs, behave well, then it's great and they can help your economy. But if somehow they end up misaligned in bad ways, it would be like if there was a new country of geniuses. That's also what Dario uses as a term. And well, if you're not sure about the intentions of that country of geniuses, you should be careful. They could develop new weapons, new ways to influence your public opinion and influence your democracy, for example. And so this is something that means we have to both improve the technology to make sure they have good intentions, but also the security aspect becomes important, because even if we know how to make them do the things we ask, how do we make sure they don't fall in the wrong hands? Okay, that's another national security. So you have this country of geniuses, but who decides what they're going to do? If somebody can steal the weights, the code, if you want, of these systems, then they could use that country of geniuses against you. So that becomes a real national security risk as well. And so these data centers need to be protected from a national security perspective and cyber attack perspective and so on, and internal, like human national security risks as well. Like people in the company might have, become helping another nation to get access to those systems. It also raises national security issues regarding the open weight models. So we can have a long discussion about open weight models, but basically, when the system is open weight, it means that anybody can download the code and the weights and run it on their computer. Whereas the closed weight models, you can run them on the company's computer, which means the company can stop it, can fix a security problem, and then it's fixed. But if you share it to anyone, including terrorists and other states who could use it against you, then you can't take it back. Once they have it, they can use it against you. So, on the other hand, open weight models are good for accelerating the innovation and kind of putting it more accessible to more people, because it's basically free to at least have the code. You still need to run it. And so that is really very beneficial.
Yeah, so it's really, like the open weight models, of course, in this way are a dual-edged sword, right? I think on one side, democratization of research and innovation, but on the other
But
hand, as you're
once you
saying,
understand that, there should be an obvious recommendation, which is the governments should require that the open weight model developers make these national security evaluations of the risk. If the open weight model is not powerful enough to become weaponized by third parties, then it's great to share it openly. But if it can be weaponized, at a level that's really dangerous, then it should not. But right now, there are no rules. So this is an example of where understanding the underlying science should basically dictate what governments need to do.
great. Now, of course, we've been talking about the US and China in a geopolitical competition framework. We've been talking about the big firms, the big AI firms that are building sometimes closed models, sometimes open ones.
Yeah.
And then we've been talking about governments. Now,
Yeah.
governments, of course, go beyond the US government and the Chinese government. So I want to ask you, how much of this framing, how much of the agenda setting, how much of the risk evaluation, risk monitoring, all of these pieces that we've been discussing, Professor Bengio, are ultimately lying in the hands of just a few governments and a few companies on one hand? And the corollary of that question is, what can other countries here do? The so-called middle powers and other countries like Canada, India, European countries, others, what role can they really play in order to make sure that all of these pieces in a way come together for some kind of framework?
Yeah, this is a really important question, especially for countries like India and Canada. So to start on this, you need to go back to something very crucial, that intelligence gives power. So we've talked about the national security aspect of that, but there's an economic aspect of that as well. Countries that have access to very advanced AIs could dominate others economically, and then eventually that becomes political domination as well, if these other countries don't have access to the same level of AI. Currently, AI is kind of a commodity. All the leading companies want to make it accessible because they need to make money. But it's possible that one day, when AI becomes much more advanced, that it'll become more profitable for them to keep the most advanced AIs for driving their own companies, competing with the companies in other countries. Another scenario could be like we're seeing with US exports control, right? A government could decide, oh, you don't have access to our technology anymore unless you do XYZ. And we've seen already that kind of thing with tariffs, but it could be the same in negotiations that involve the access to very advanced AI. If there continues to be a kind of monopoly or duopoly of just two countries having access to the most advanced AI. So I encourage everyone to listen to the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, who gave a speech at Davos. And he said a lot of really important things. But one phrase which should stick is, if you're not at the table, you are on the menu.
That's right.
What this means is that if you don't have the AI capability or access, like a real guaranteed access to the most advanced AI, others will dominate you. And it can start economically, as I said, but it can easily turn into political domination. That's being eaten means,
That's
right? So what can those middle powers, as he talked about in his speech, do? Well, individually, they have no chance to compete. The amount of capital and talent and energy that is required for training these really large models, and it's going to be worse in the coming years if the trend continues, is such that the duopoly is likely to continue for a while. So the only thing that those countries can do is do it together. Form alliances with other similar countries that basically share the same concern that I just talked about. Right? As soon as you're outside of the US and China, you should ask yourself, what's going to happen? Is there a chance that I'll be eaten alive if I don't somehow find a solution? And I don't think even the richest countries in Europe can't do it alone, in my opinion. At least their chances of success is going to be much larger if they form alliances where the deal is basically of the form, well, if any of us strikes, advances that can compete with the leading models, we'll share it with the others. And it's going to be a hard commitment. And it can go through joint efforts as well, of course, right? But the point is, now you can have complementarity. You can also share the cost of training a model, because the biggest cost in training those models is the electricity that's needed to train a model. And if 10 different countries each train their own model, they will have a weaker model because the size matters in the intelligence of these models than if they get together and they train one bigger model. So there's a real, it's because it's like fixed costs, it's capital costs. So there's a real incentive for countries to somehow strike these kinds of deals.
I think that's a great call. I had a different podcast conversation in the context of tariffs when the tariff wars had been unleashed on the world. And a very similar recommendation came from an economist at Harvard that the countries must get together because alone, individually, they will always lose that tariff war. But of course, as we saw in the case of tariffs also, Professor Bengio, the countries didn't band together. They all ended up doing individual negotiations, trying to get the best for themselves. And so one worries about this issue of the commons. And for a lot of these middle powers, as Mr. Carney said, but really, it seems like an ideal solution, but we'll see.
He said another thing, which I think is important. Waiting for a global arrangement of this kind is it's not going to work. It can start small. It can start with 2 countries, 3 countries making bilateral, trilateral agreements, and then grow. And that's much more likely to work because otherwise, it's hard to get a bunch of governments to agree on something, especially if there's 150 of them. But a handful that can work. And then once you have a few countries doing this sort of thing, other middle powers really have an interest in joining.
Yeah. Much like in, I think, the broader geopolitical world, we are seeing regional groupings emerge as an alternative maybe to a multilateral UN alternative. You're seeing regional groupings emerge.
I mean, ultimately, it should be global, right?
Correct. But as a starting point, I think you're suggesting that, as Mr. Kanye suggested rather, that regional groupings might be the...
There's a difference with the tariffs. The tariffs, the threat was given, and then, you can't create these sorts of alliances in a week. AI, we have a slightly longer runway to these potential risks of domination by AI. We're talking about at least years, right? So it's not in the next 12 months. It's maybe 5 years. Well, nobody knows, but it's not as quick, right? It's not weeks, it's years. So that gives a bit of time to negotiate this sort of thing and get going with research collaboration, development collaboration, and so on.
Yeah. Let's now move to the International Safety Report. Professor Bengio, you've served as the chair, as you mentioned, of the 2025 report. The 2026 report has just come out, and I think you'll be sharing it at the India AI Impact Summit as well. But talk to us about some of the key findings, some of the key surprising maybe pieces that you'd like to highlight out of that report. We'll, of course, encourage everyone to go read the entirety of the report, but give us some of the key pieces you'd like to highlight.
So I already highlighted a few things. There is the benchmarks on capabilities. It continues to go up. In fact, on some benchmarks, it's going up exponentially, which is like a technical term to mean the advances are accelerating.
Correct. They're going up like that, not linearly.
Yes, exactly. There is one particular area which is interesting to pay attention to that we haven't discussed yet, which is the agentic capabilities. So the companies have been working on AI agents, as they call them. So they can do work for you on your computer, maybe on your email, your files, your social, media account, your bank account, whatever. The technology is not yet mature for this. But if you look at the scientific evaluation of these agentic capabilities, it is going up very quickly. And it is going up exponentially. Yet it's still way below humans. So if we measure the complexity of planning tasks by how much time it takes a person to do, last year AIs were able to do tasks that would take 10 minutes to a person to do. And now they can do tasks that take 30 minutes, so 3 times more. And the curve, it's not just over the last year, it continues to go up. But that's still much less than a human who can plan for days, weeks, months, years, right? But if we follow that curve, that means in around 5 years, these planning tasks, which are software engineering, you would basically get at the human level. So that gives us sort of a sense of the timeline. But of course, there's no guarantee that the future is going to be like the past in terms of the trends. But it's at least hard data to better understand where we might be going if trends continue. And agency is important for several reasons, both from an economic perspective and a risk perspective. So from an economic perspective, you have to understand that this is the most profitable advance that companies are hoping to make, because in order to replace people on their job behind a desk, so we're still talking about not the robots, but just people doing things behind a computer, for that kind of automation, like white collar automation, you need significant advances in the agency, the ability to plan and do things that are extended over time. Because humans, they are given a task and it might take them a while to do the task. The more you advance on this curve of greater and greater agency, the more and more tasks become something that can be automated. So that is both worth a lot of money. That's where they're going to think they're going to make money, not by selling, licenses, monthly dues, or even free access, as we're saying, right? That's not how they're going to make money. Where they think they're going to make money is by automating a lot of jobs. So there's a lot of pressure on the research in those companies to advance that. So that's the economic side, which has both a positive aspect and negative, because
positive for some,
positive for some, especially those who own the capital, like the owners of those companies, and negative for the people who lose their job. And by the way, as a parenthesis connecting to our previous discussion about AI domination, we could eventually be in a situation where in one country where AI is deployed, a lot of people lose their job, and that's going to cost a lot of money to the government in helping those people who lost their job. But the revenues, the profits rather, might be in a different country, the country where the AI was developed. So that would be economically catastrophic for the country where, there's automation, but you don't get the revenues that can.
A real world example of that, Professor Bengio, if I may add, was just a couple of days ago. Anthropic releases a way of doing certain legal tasks and other tasks faster. And the market caps of several IT services firms across the world, including in India, where, of course, the Indian IT services sector is a big pillar of the Indian economy, fell drastically. And that's a sign that the value creation is happening in one place, but it's associated with value destruction on the other side.
Absolutely. Even if overall the total value created might be larger, this could create huge disruptions for people who lose their job, obviously, for the economies of those countries where this happens, and for the geopolitical order. I mean, people could, end up very desperate about this. So it is something that governments should really pay attention to. Now, staying on like the agency aspect, there's also another kind of risk. So what does it mean for an AI to be more agentic? It means that it needs less human oversight. Like when we say that the AI can complete a task that takes an hour or two, or whatever, that means during that hour or two, there's no human checking. So that's very different from the current way many people interface with chatbots, where you ask a question, you get an answer, and basically you're the one deciding what to do with the answer. The AI doesn't run and do its thing for hours. But that's what agency means, that there will be very little or no oversight, which means the potential for the misalignment issues that we've discussed becomes much more severe if there's no human in the loop. And we need to make progress on the reliability and the safety aspects of these systems for that kind of deployment to make sense from a societal perspective.
Yeah. The other piece I want to touch upon from the report is the piece that you mentioned, I think, in the report about capabilities being so jagged, right? So on certain tasks, on certain kind of things, the capabilities are, as you were saying, improving exponentially in some cases. But then there remain other tasks where these models are simply still out of depth. So the question I want to ask you is, who's deciding what tasks we want to train these AI models to get better and better at, or become more agentic at, right? And which tasks are getting, let's say, ignored? And I ask this from the perspective of the global south, where certain things, certain problems are endemic to societies and to economies in the global south. And those problems don't seem to be the topic of research of how to get these AI models to either be better at or the AI agents to be better at. I'll give you an example. I'd love an AI agent that could become better at healthcare and education in a country like India, where many still don't get the kind of healthcare and education they deserve. But clearly, the models today are getting better and better at travel planning, bio weapon making, cyber hacking, and all the risks that you've outlined. So who gets to decide?
Non-consensual, sexual imagery
That's
is
right.
another example that most countries don't want, but we're seeing a lot of progress there. And there's a lot of money to be made, and companies are kind of trying to exploit this. So you're absolutely right. But let me go back to your question about, where is the jaggedness coming from? For the most part, it isn't something that was planned. Like, the companies didn't intend to do that. And the way that these systems are trained isn't by trying to get better on specific tasks. That is not how they're built. They're completely general training procedures where the AI learns about everything by reading everything and seeing a lot of videos and images and stuff, right? So it just turns out that with this completely general way of learning, with the current recipes that exist, you end up with some capabilities where the AI is already, beating most humans, and some capabilities where it is not doing better than a 6-year-old. So, as an example, in the report, we talk about the advances in science, math, and coding that have been really impressive in the last year.
Yeah.
And it's to the point where those systems do as well as the best students in mathematics and programming in international competition and win like gold medals at these international competition. So they're like the smartest kid in math and programming.
The next Turing Award.
Well, but at the same time, they stumble on really like stupid reasoning problems, and they continue to hallucinate, although it's much less than last year. They have these alignment issues. So it's true, yet the jaggedness is there. Now, it is true, however, that of course the companies are trying to patch that jaggedness. And then that means they're going to train those systems more on things that they do care about, economically speaking, which may not be education and healthcare. So I do think that this is a place where governments need to intervene. So either by providing the right incentives for company to do that research, or to fund the research that's going to be needed to make sure that AI is going to be not just deployed, but developed to have the skills for better education and better healthcare. And it's one of the reasons why, personally, I think that we would be all much better off if AI was developed as a global public good. So what does that mean? Right now, the way AI is developed is through the normal, capitalist competition between corporations, which has served technology advances quite well in the last few decades, but is creating all kinds of problems. So we talked about the competition between corporations, so they cut corners on safety issues. We talked about the geopolitical competition, and we talked right now about the fact that AI is developed mostly to make a lot of money quickly rather than to solve the problems that society really needs AI to be, developed for. If somehow we end up, and this is maybe not something going to happen next year, but we can plan it. We can think when we start discussing collaborations between countries. Well, if it is governments taking the lead, of course, with private investors, but if it's government taking the lead, they could essentially steer that development in directions that are going to be globally good, and in particular for the global south, which currently has no voice on which direction this is developed.
Yeah, which brings me to, of course, the India AI Impact Summit, Professor Bengio, which is coming up. You'll be there. What are your expectations from the summit? We've discussed a lot about what different countries, governments, the global south, the middle powers could be doing. This is the first time the AI Summit is being held in the southern hemisphere, so to say, global south. So what are some of your expectations from the summit? What do you hope can come out of that summit, and what can be done to best leverage this time where you're seeing this convergence of people from across industries, sectors, countries in Delhi soon?
So in my opinion, the most important benefit of summits like this is that they bring together governmental leadership of many countries in one place at one time, where they will focus their attention on the sort of question we're discussing. And this is important because my experience with politicians and leading civil servants of many countries is that their main issue is that they don't have the bandwidth to focus on a particular problem because there are so many problems that they have to consider. Right.
Okay. This is the problem of the future. It doesn't take precedence over problems of today. Correct.
Exactly. Like political battles take precedence. For them, it's like survival over something that's going to require careful planning over multiple years, and maybe collaborations with other countries and things like that, which don't seem as urgent. So a summit like this will be an opportunity for these people to hear from experts and to hear from each other what's going on with AI and help them figure out what they should do about it. Maybe the most important bit that is happening in those summits is the understanding by the leaders of governments that AI is on a path to become the most important political question, not just technological question, for humanity in the coming years, at an economic level, at a national security level, at a political level, because of all the questions we discussed already. And that means after the event, they continue to pay attention and think through what's best for my people and what should I do? Because right now, my concern is most governments have the psychological bias, which is common among most humans, to consider the future just like, it's going to be more or less the same as the present. But that doesn't work for AI. If you think like yourself 5 years ago, if somebody would have told you, look, here's a chatbot that can do all these miracles, you would have said, ha, 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 that's science fiction. Like understanding all the main languages, winning all the math competitions, passing all the exams in like most disciplines, including at the PhD level, being able to synthesize images that are essentially indistinguishable from the real, videos, imitating people's voices, creating texts that are at the best level in like linguistic ability of anyone. That would have sounded like science fiction. But now, if you consider what it will be in 5 years, there's a good chance the jump will be of equal qualitative magnitude.
Yeah.
And we're not ready for that. We're not planning for that. That's the most important thing that can come out. And that includes managing the risks as well. I mean, like the technical risks that like alignment, and managing the geopolitical risks that we've been talking as well about.
Yeah. And if I may add, I think one of the key outcomes, given we've been talking about the International Safety Report that you've chaired for the last 2 years, coming out of the Bletchley Park Summit, one may hope that out of this Impact Summit that India is hosting comes out some years of an international AI impact report, right? Where how it's being used to leverage, AI for public good, for the good of many, and for, themes that are much more pressing maybe for the global south in many countries. Maybe that can be one of the...
Well,
deliverables?
this is already on the works. We don't know if it's going to succeed, but as maybe you know, the UN has voted last fall for the creation of an international panel on AI, including the benefits and the risks. And the names of the experts from around the world that are going to be on that panel was revealed, I think, just very recently. I'm on that list.
Well,
And
congratulations.
thank you, thank you. And hopefully that process works out. That process ends up being really producing independent scientific, consensus, similar to what we've done for the AI safety report, and is going to have a lot more focus on the global South issues, because at the UN level, this is obviously something very central.
No, this has been great, Professor Bengio. I know we're running out of time. We end every podcast with a quick rapid fire segment, just
All
to
right.
make things more fun and exciting. So we'll do that, if I may. I'm going to start off with a few questions around the policy side and then some personal applications questions, just to give you a little bit of a heads up. On AI, Professor Bengio, do you feel that AI might lead to the second great divergence in the world? The first great divergence, of course, being driven by the Industrial Revolution, where you see some countries become really rich and others lagging. Would you think that AI might lead to the second great divergence in our world?
There's a real risk of that. It could go both ways, but the dynamics of power and economic competition are likely to lead to that kind of divergence, yes.
For policymakers, especially in the global south or countries that are not the US or China today, what would you suggest they prioritize? AI innovation, AI R&D, or AI adoption and AI diffusion?
So most governments make the mistake of thinking that they can succeed in the future of AI by focusing on AI adoption. But that's a mistake, because even if your companies are willing and able to deploy AI, if you don't have guaranteed access to the most advanced AI, then you can still be completely dominated by other countries that have those models. And so you need to have both. You need to have investment in AI innovation at the frontier, not just some little application, but actually being able to compete. And you probably need to do that with partnerships with other countries.
It goes back to your point about either being at the table or being the lunch. If a new research ecosystem was to come up in the world that was going to compete with the US AI research ecosystem and the Chinese, where do you think that might come up?
Well,
Don't say
likely.
Canada. Don't say Canada,
Well,
because we know that Canada, of course, has a great research ecosystem with people like
yes.
you.
But I think an obvious contender for this is Europe, both in terms of total GDP, quantity of talent, and capital. If Europe gets its act together, it could lead the world and many other countries outside of Europe in forming a more, say, value aligned bloc, where the idea is not just to develop AI, but to develop it in a way that's respectful of each other, human dignity, and not used to dominate each other.
Yeah. What would a country like India have to do to get into that sphere as well? Three things that India would need to do.
Well, signal it is the first thing, and start with maybe bilateral or number of deals with a few countries to increase the chances of having access in the future to the strongest possible models through those partnerships. India has an amazing talent pool that's unique, both because of the size of the population and because of the great research institutions that exist in India. So India could definitely contribute to a joint effort involving multiple countries to make sure India is going to have access to the most advanced models, in whatever future, as capabilities of AI continue to increase.
And this is a bit of a question that's on the top of mind for many people. We've alluded to it in our conversation. Do you think AI ultimately displaces more jobs or creates more in the long run?
Well, it depends on what your beliefs are about the future advances in AI. If you think that the capabilities are going to saturate, then AI is going to be a commodity, and it's not going to replace, that many jobs, because you need much more advances in capabilities than currently exist. if you think that AI capabilities will continue on the current trend or even
Which is, I
accelerate,
think, what you were saying, you
well,
believe.
that's the default, in my opinion. If things continue according to the previous trend, then we are going to see a lot more people losing their jobs than people, new jobs created. And it might take some time because between the moment where the AI has the capability and the moment where, a whole industry, a whole sector is
Yes.
automated,
Right.
might take several years. But in the long run, I think that we have to start, dealing with the idea that most of the work that is currently done by people will be done by machines, and how to reorganize our societies so that it still works for people.
Yeah. Which AI application keeps you up at night, both in terms of excitement, in terms of potential, and which one keeps you, let's say, most concerned or worried at night?
Well, in terms of beneficial applications, I've been involved in my research group, and I'm quite excited with the prospect of advances in medicine and basic biological understanding of how the body works, as well as on technology to improve our chances to deal with climate change. On the negative side, what the leading companies have said they would be doing, which concerns me, is they're focusing on how to make AI do AI research. In other words, they want to automate the work of doing research in AI. And if they're able to do that, it could accelerate the advances in a way that society doesn't have a chance to cope. It would greatly increase the risks of creating either like catastrophic misuse or catastrophic loss of control. So this is something that worries me quite a lot.
I've asked the next question to some people, and the answer has been you. So I'm excited to ask this question of you, which is which thinker in the world of AI, it could be a researcher or an intellectual, which thinker in AI has inspired you the most and whose work you follow very closely?
I'm going to name my colleague from University of Toronto, Jeff Hinton.
Definitely.
He's been my role model for all of my career. And he and I are very much aligned on our perception that there's a real catastrophic risk in the future if we don't steer collectively a beneficial path for AI.
Anyone from the global south? Anyone from not from Canada or the US or Europe?
That's a good question. I wish there were more. And the global south needs to rise up to the challenge. The kinds of research and both on the technical side and the governance side that we're seeing in the global south is not really about what's happening with the frontier. And that needs to change for the global south to really be at the table rather than on the menu.
Yeah. And last two questions. Books that you recommend people who are watching or listening to this conversation of ours today, which has been great. Books that you'd recommend that come to mind for people to read, one. And second, podcast guests that you would recommend we have.
Oh, I would recommend a book that I'm currently reading by Helen Landemore. And the book is titled Politics Without Politicians. And it's about the ongoing movement that's already happening with experiments in about 50 countries to make democratic decisions more democratic using what's called citizens' assemblies. And the reason I'm pointing this out in the context of an AI conversation is that, lobbyists and political kind of motivations could derail our ability to steer a positive future for AI. We're going to need much stronger democratic institutions, much more robust democratic institutions as AI becomes more and more capable. So it's not just that we need to get better on AI, we're going to need to get better at checks and balances and the honesty and the representativity of the decisions that are going to be taken collectively in many countries.
I think that's a great recommendation, an unexpected one. So great. Thank you so much for that, Professor Bengio. What about podcast guests that you recommend we have?
Well, I would recommend again Jeff Hinton, but also Stuart Russell, Max Stegmark.
We've had Professor Russell on already.
One that maybe gets less attention, I recommend, is Jan Tallinn. He's one of those billionaires who made money in Silicon Valley. He's European, and he's really concerned about the future trajectory of AI, and he has interesting things to say.
No, great. This has been a great conversation. I had very high expectations from it, but it's exceeded them. Thank you so much for, I think, all the work you've done in the field of AI. Professor Benjo, all the great responsibilities you've taken on, not just in terms of the safety report that you've chaired now, but as you were mentioning, the UN panel that you are now also on, and various other initiatives that I know you undertake despite all the other academic and research responsibilities you have. So thank you for that. Thank you for taking the time today. And we look forward to having you at the India AI Impact Summit very soon.
Thank you.